From the heart of Africa, Burkina Faso shines anew.
The Africa spoke. Don't forget to subscribe for more powerful African stories.
No one expected anything to grow here. Not after the fires, not after the poison, not after the silence. And yet, there it was. A low hum, like a motor, but alive. Thousands of bees, not swarming, not attacking, just flying in, like they had business here. Who the hell brings bees into a dead forest? Turns out people who've run out of better ideas, they called it the ashlands. Used to be forest once. Now, just dust and char. The kind of place that gets flagged on satellite maps as ecological loss and quietly forgotten. NGOs showed up, took photos, wrote reports, left, you know the drill. And honestly, who could blame them? The soil was dead, the trees were gone. There weren't even weeds, not even weeds. But someone stayed. A kid, basically. Amadou. Didn't work for the government, didn't have a degree, but he had a theory that bees, yes, bees, could bring the forest back. Sounds stupid? That's what people told him. They laughed, said he should try mushrooms next, or unicorns. But he'd seen it. In pockets of land where the bees never left, weird stuff happened. Humidity rose. Mold showed up, the good kind. Small plants, stuff that had no business growing, somehow pushed through the dirt. He called them life bubbles. Tiny zones where nature fought back, not with scale, not with force, but with consistency. Look, I know how this sounds. If you're from the US, this kind of thing belongs on a feel-good segment between a mass shooting and a weather report. But what if it's real? What if a few hundred bees know more about healing land than $1 million climate model? You tell me. If this messes with what you thought was possible, comment below, or just share it with someone who still believes small things don't matter. So Amadou got to work. Not in a lab, not on some funded pilot with a shiny name and a logo, just a clearing in the middle of ash. He built 3 hives out of scrap wood, covered them in thick mud to keep the heat out, planted a handful of wildflowers nearby, seeds he stole from forgotten roadsides. His friends told him he was wasting his time. His uncle literally bet him a goat that nothing would grow. And maybe they were right. For the first 2 weeks, nothing happened. The bees came, they sniffed around, then left. Silence again. Then on day 17, it rained. Just a little. Not even enough to soak your shirt. But it was enough. Because 4 days later, the bees came back. Not just the original ones. New colonies, multiple hives forming in the same area. And that's when Amadou noticed something he hadn't seen in years. A thin layer of green fuzz creeping up from the cracks. Not weeds, moss. Which, if you know anything about dead soil, is insane. Because moss is picky. It needs shade, humidity, and a micro-ecosystem to even show up. Which meant something underneath was already changing. Let me put it like this. In the US, we spend billions on soil remediation projects. Carbon sequestration, drone seeding, chemical recovery programs. And this kid, without credentials or a cent, got moss to grow in a place certified as ecologically non-viable by 3 different agencies. So yeah, it wasn't just about bees anymore. Something was working. If you're still thinking maybe it's just a fluke, cool. I thought that too. Until the bugs came back. Then the birds. Then one day, a rabbit. And if you've ever seen a rabbit hop through a place you swore was dead, I swear to God, it feels like resurrection. Ever seen life choose to come back where it wasn't invited? If that idea hits you the way it hit me, drop a comment. I want to know I'm not the only one still getting goosebumps thinking about it. By the 3rd week, it wasn't just moss anymore. There were vines. Ugly ones, but alive. Then mushrooms, tiny white ones popping up near the hives like little flags claiming the land. And then flies, ants, dragonflies. It was like the soil had memory and something had jogged it awake. Amadou started noticing patterns. The bees didn't just hover around the flowers. They moved between fungus clusters and wet patches, like they were coordinating. It didn't make scientific sense, But nature doesn't always care about making sense. Word spread. Slowly. A few neighbors came to look. Some brought their kids. They pointed at the green patches and said stuff like, "My grandfather says trees used to grow here." One old woman cried, not out of joy, more like disbelief. "It smells like my childhood," she whispered. That hit harder than any graph ever could. Let me pause here, because if this had been in Oregon, or Vermont, or hell, even parts of Texas, there'd be a whole team of researchers camped out by now. Full drone coverage. Lab samples, press releases. But this wasn't America. It was a no-name zone on the edge of a forgotten district. No white papers, no grants. Just a guy with bees, some mud, and stubborn hope. Here's the twist, it didn't stop. One patch turned into 2, then 5, then a corridor. Birds started nesting in broken trunks. Termites came back. Which, by the way, is a big deal, because termites mean the underground is working again. Air is circulating, organic matter is moving. The land was literally breathing again. Ever seen a place take its first breath after being dead for years? I swear it's more powerful than any protest, more honest than any campaign. That's life saying, "I'm not done." If you've ever believed healing doesn't need permission, I want you to hit share. Let the algorithm hear it. That's when the problem started. Not nature, people. Some guy from a nearby farm came by and started shouting that the bees would sting his goats. A teacher warned that the mushrooms could be toxic. One man accused Amadou of practicing witchcraft. I wish I was joking. People fear what they don't understand, especially when it's working. By now, nearly 30 hives were active. The vegetation spread past the original zone. It was no longer a fluke. It was a pattern. That scared folks, especially the ones who sold pesticides, irrigation pipes, imported fertilizer. If the land could recover on its own, with bees no less, what did that say about their business? So yeah, the resistance wasn't subtle. A few hives were kicked over. One morning, all the wildflower beds were torched. No arrests, just silence. Because this wasn't some criminal plot, it was power, quiet power. The kind that doesn't need to say no out loud, it just makes things disappear. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. If this were a Western country, this would be framed as an eco-innovation project. But when it happens in a poor village, it's called unregulated, unsafe, superstition. That's not just bias, it's narrative control. And narratives are everything. Let's ask the real question. What scares people more? Failed land staying dead? Or the idea that it doesn't need us to come back to life? If you've ever watched something beautiful make people uncomfortable, hit like. That tension? That's where change begins. By month 4, the bees had triggered something serious. Soil tests from a local agricultural institute, FASA, confirmed microbial life up by 62%. Earthworm activity back from 0 to measurable. Pollination rates in the nearby village doubled. And for the first time in 7 years, the groundwater table, once considered collapsed, had risen by 3 centimeters. This wasn't anecdotal anymore. It was measurable, replicable. But not everyone was thrilled. The Department of Rural Development stopped returning Amadou's calls. A fertilizer wholesaler tried to sue him for spreading anti-agricultural sentiment. That's a real quote. And then came the real hit. A UN-funded soil restoration initiative, 2.7 million, 3 years of budget, 10 international experts, was quietly pulled from the region. Why? Because unofficially, the area no longer qualifies as a red zone. You heard that right. The bees made the land too alive to be worth investing in. Let that sink in. There's an entire global industry built on ecological despair. Once your land heals, you stop being profitable. No more grant cycles. No more climate resilience packages. No more PowerPoints in Geneva. A broken system depends on broken land. And this barefoot bee kid was breaking the pattern. I did some digging. Between 2021 and 2024, Sub-Saharan Africa received over $5.4 billion in external environmental aid. Guess how much of that went to community-led nature-based solutions? Less than 2%. The rest? Infrastructure-heavy, consultant-driven, tech solutionist pipelines. Meanwhile, Amadou had spent under $600, And he wasn't saving trees, he was bringing back a forest. No PR firm, no helicopter surveys, no launch event with matching vests. Just bees, wildflowers, time. So of course they pushed back. Local media ignored the story. One local journalist who tried to film the site was threatened with legal action for disseminating false ecological claims. Another, an intern, was warned not to associate with fringe restoration activists. You ever wonder why good news spreads slower than crisis? Because no one's selling anything here. So tell me, honestly, if a $600 project beats a multi-million-dollar one, is that innovation or is it mutiny? Let's hear your answer below. They tried to silence it, but the land wouldn't shut up. Green kept spreading. Bees kept building. By month 5, the corridor reached 1.8 kilometers. Wild acacia trees were growing without planting. Local farmers began noticing fewer pests, more birds, and this shocked everyone. Lower temperatures by up to 2.3 degrees inside the reforested zones. A group of school kids started calling it the breathing line. Then something happened that no one planned. A 15-year-old named Mariam took her phone, filmed a time-lapse of bees working around a patch of moss and mushrooms, then posted it online with the caption, "They told us the land was dead, but look." It blew up, fast. Within a week, 1.2 million views on Pan-African TikTok. Shares from eco-influencers in Kenya, Senegal, South Africa. The hashtag #BeelineForest started trending. This wasn't just buzz. It was the first time the story broke the algorithm wall. No press release, no foreign sponsorship, just a kid, her phone, and the truth. But let's be honest, virality doesn't equal victory. The system fights back harder when it loses control of the narrative. First came the fact-check articles, sponsored content, headlines like, "Unverified claims of forest regrowth in unsanctioned bee zones." "Activists endanger locals with DIY ecology." "Teen video fuels misinformation about land health." These were real, published in outlets that previously ignored the region entirely. But here's the twist. They weren't fact-checking to correct. They were fact-checking to reclaim, to take the story back. Because if they couldn't bury it, they'd try to brand it. Too late. Local WhatsApp groups started calling Amadou the beekeeper who defied money. A community elder blessed the hives in public. Farmers who used to mock him now asked for wildflower seeds. It wasn't just restoration anymore, it was rebellion. Let me hit you with a number. In Burkina Faso, traditional monocrop zones experienced a 15-25% yield loss due to heat stress between 2022 and 2024. In the bee corridor, soil moisture retention was up 47%. No fertilizers, no irrigation, just bees and biodiversity. Tell me again, how is this not science? If you've ever felt that truth doesn't need a logo to be real, drop a comment. Better yet, send this to someone still waiting for permission to act. After the video went viral, institutions woke up, not to support but to contain. Within 2 weeks, a delegation from the Ministry of Environment arrived at the bee corridor. Not with cameras, with clipboards. No questions to Amadou, no acknowledgement of locals, just photos, soil samples, and polite smiles that didn't reach their eyes. 3 days later, a press statement dropped. Experimental Ecological Recovery Project receives preliminary recognition from national authorities. What? Experimental? They hadn't done a damn thing. Then it got worse. A European-backed NGO published a paper titled "Potential Role of Imported Bee Species in Sub-Saharan Agroecology." They literally tried to credit foreign bees, which weren't even used. Every hive in Amadou's project came from local, native colonies. This wasn't science. It was theft by narrative. And then the Western media joined in, now that the buzz couldn't be ignored. CNN Africa ran a segment. Young innovators and international experts restore forest together. Together? No experts were there. No funding. No partnership. Just lies. Scrubbed clean for comfort. Here's the number they didn't mention. Of the $3.1 million USD pledged by international agencies for community-led ecological projects in the region over the past 2 years, less than 1.7% ever reached local actors. The rest, absorbed by admin fees, reports, security escorts, and technical assistance. But yeah, sure, let's act like they helped. Let's be brutally honest. What scared them wasn't the bees. It wasn't even Amadou. It was the proof that nature didn't need their permission or their funding. You know how in America we love a local hero story? Farmer saves town, teacher starts free school, firefighter raises orphans. We eat that stuff up. But only when it fits the structure. Only when the right people still hold the mic. This didn't, so instead of amplifying it, they tried to bury it under bureaucratic language, reframe it as co-developed, repackage it for policy briefs. A quiet hijack of something raw, grassroots, and unbranded. But the forest didn't care. It kept growing. So let me ask you, when someone creates value without permission, does the system celebrate or retaliate? If you've ever built something real and watched someone else try to slap their name on it, this part's for you. Drop your story in the comments. Or share this so people see how deep the game really goes. By month 8, the bee corridor had crossed 3 villages. Not just symbolically, physically. It connected former drought zones through living strips of forest no one planted. Trees germinated naturally. Wild turmeric, hibiscus, cassava started reappearing. Seeds likely carried by birds or forgotten in the ground for years. The land wasn't being restored, it was remembering. Here's what no one expected. Farmers in neighboring districts began copying the model. No NGO guidebooks, no external training. Just observation, imitation, and instinct. One village, Boroboro, logged a 38% increase in yam yields simply by planting around self-formed beehives and wildflower zones. Another reported a noticeable drop in malaria infections, less stagnant water, more frogs, fewer mosquitoes. A report from the Segu Ecological Monitoring Group, independent, locally run, found evapotranspiration rates down 23% in bee zones. That's significant. It means moisture stays in the land longer. You get crops surviving dry spells. You get cooler microclimates. You get life. And suddenly, the story was no longer just a story. Mali sent observers. Benin asked for a replication workshop. A university in Ghana offered to co-publish Amadou's soil data. Even the African Union made an informal note. Unverified grassroots model showing promising resilience potential. Let me give you numbers they can't ignore anymore. Across 6 bee zones, average soil carbon increased by 21%. Bird species count went from 4 to 19. Crop diversity doubled without chemical input. No irrigation, no subsidies, just space for nature to do its job. And guess what? People believed it not because some scientist told them to. They believed it because they saw frogs come back, because their goats had shade, because their kids stopped coughing from dust. In the US, this would have been patented by now. Branded, protected, probably licensed to Amazon for nature as a service. But here, they called it what it was, ours. A grandmother in Koro village said something that stuck with me. This forest has no fence, but it protects more than any wall. If that doesn't sound like strategy, I don't know what does. So let me ask you, shouldn't resilience be judged by what stays when help leaves? If you think real sustainability starts without permission, go ahead, share this. Let them know the blueprint's already out. By month 10, no one called it the bee corridor anymore. People started calling it the living line. Not a project, not a phase. A thing that exists, like a river or a mountain. Something that outlived the people who began it. Schools along the forest's edge built open-air classrooms under the trees. Not because it was poetic, because it was cool enough to study again. Temperatures dropped by nearly 3.7 degrees Celsius inside the zone. Kids stopped missing school during the dry season. Teachers said students were calmer, more focused. When asked why, one boy just shrugged and said, "The air here is soft." Women's groups began collecting wild herbs for local medicine. Midwives reported fewer heat stroke cases in pregnancy. Elders started telling stories they hadn't told in years, about trees that listen, rivers that remember, bees that carry messages. This wasn't nostalgia, this was cultural repair. And the forest? It didn't ask for recognition. It didn't apply for protection status, but people started protecting it anyway. A group of teenage boys formed patrol groups, not to keep people out, but to make sure no one dumped plastic or lit fires. Kids were seen scolding grown men for stepping on young saplings. A 7-year-old girl tied ribbons around new tree trunks and named them after her cousins. Let me drop a number most development reports never touch. In regions where land regeneration is state-led, community enforcement compliance averages around 31%. In this corridor, over 90%, with zero top-down rules. Why? Because people defend what they feel belongs to them. And this forest was never anyone's project. It was theirs. One regional officer came to inspect and asked Amadou if they'd filed any heritage documentation. He laughed and said, "Why? This isn't heritage. This is homework." Then he pointed to a group of kids planting seeds behind the school. They'll write the real report. In the West, we love building monuments to the past, cathedrals, statues, museums, but this is a living monument, not carved from stone, but grown from trust. And no one needs a plaque to remember a place where the land started breathing again. If that hits you in the chest, if you've ever seen something sacred born from the ordinary, drop it in the comments. Let people know what your living line is. By the end of the first year, no one owned the forest. It wasn't a project anymore. It wasn't a headline. It just was. A thing that existed, a line of life cutting through what used to be absence. And it kept going. Bees still built, trees still climbed, kids still ran under shade that wasn't there a year ago. No ribbon was cut, no official declared it finished. Because nothing about it was performative. This wasn't restoration for cameras, it was survival that refused to wait for paperwork. Meanwhile, reports started coming out. One from the Ecological Policy Network in Nairobi. Bee-based wild corridors may outperform engineered greening zones in cost, speed, and resilience. Another from an EU think tank, this one more cautious. Concerns over unregulated natural restoration practices bypassing institutional accountability. Translation? They're scared. Not of failure, but of a future where they're not needed. Because this forest doesn't make anyone rich, it just works. And here's the part that burns. If something this effective, this natural, this human, can be born from almost nothing, then what the hell have we been funding for the last 30 years? You think I'm exaggerating? Between 1995 and 2025, global spending on land restoration topped $180 billion. And what do we have to show for it? Pilot programs, white papers, carbon offset markets. While this started with bees and stubbornness. No app, no logo, just people who didn't wait for permission. So here's the final question. What if the most radical thing we can do in a dying world is to remember how to let it live? If that lands, if that makes you shift in your seat, do something. Share it. Copy the model, ask better questions. Because somewhere out there, another patch of dead land is waiting for someone who doesn't ask first. And maybe that someone is you.